All right, hi guys. My name is Ethan Scheiber, and this is our bean beetle presentation. So, as Andre just said a second ago, this presentation is based off of a lab report, and that lab report is entirely on a lab that we completed over the course of the past month in our Bio 183 lab. So, for our introduction, bean beetles are agricultural pests that are found throughout both the tropical and subtropical world, and what that area is the southern hemisphere, but the part closest to the equator. So that's Central America and the central parts and northern parts of Africa as well. Bean beetles feed off of beans and then use those same beans to raise their young or their larvae. So beans are extremely, extremely important for them. They make up their primary diet, and after they eat the bean, they burrow into them and lay their eggs on top of the beans as well. So there's some previous evidence that shows that the size of the bean can affect the reproductive rates of bean beetles. And what this evidence says is that the more surface area or the bigger the bean is, the higher the rate of success of reproduction for that beetle will be. So based on this evidence, our group hypothesized that the full beans, which have the most surface area, will have more eggs on them and living beetles in their dishes than the dishes with the half and quarter size beans. So, as Andre just discussed with our results, our hypothesis was unfortunately not supported. We all assumed that the petri dishes with the full size beans would have the most amount of eggs and beetles living in it, but that just was not the case. And actually, the dishes with half size beans had the most amount of beetles and eggs. Now, we're not entirely sure why this was the case, but I think it was somewhat foreseeable that this could have happened. Now, we know that beetles burrow into the beans, and perhaps since the half-size beans weren't as big, they didn't need as much area to be burrowed into. So the half-size beans could have made burrowing a little bit easier, subsequently making reproduction easier as well for those beetles. This same idea would apply to the quarter-size bean, but in my opinion, I think the quarter-size beans are just a little too small for that. Now, some possible flaws about why our hypothesis might not have been supported entirely. The first one is just counting the eggs. The eggs are extremely, extremely small and difficult to see on top of the beans. So it was entirely possible that our counting wasn't entirely accurate. But the only really issue this caused was in one of the half-size dishes in the very last week of the experiment, where we counted about 50 eggs, but it could have been 48 or up to 52, but not too much room for error there. Some other possible flaws with our experiment were that there simply weren't enough samples. It definitely wouldn't have hurt to have more dishes, possibly with different size beans as well as more beetles, just to increase the sample size and have some more data to look over to see the rates of reproduction with beetles in certain environments. Another possible flaw was some human interference. Now, when our beetles died completely and there were no eggs, we did put in some new beetles, as Andre said a little bit earlier, and this human interference could have not necessarily mimicked a natural environment with beetles laying eggs and reproducing. So that could have been another issue there as well. So lastly, for our conclusion, as I said already, our hypothesis was not supported. The beetles did not stay in the full-size dishes. The most amount of eggs relied on the half-size beans. The highest, just one dish individually had over 50 eggs, and the highest full-size bean dish had only 16. So there's quite a big difference there. What I think we can learn from this experiment is that even though in nature beetles are typically presented with full-size beans as they don't grow in quarter and half sizes, but when they're presented with half and quarter size beans in a lab environment, they actually prefer the half-size beans. And I think we could use this to maybe learn a little bit more about the behavior of beetles and possibly say that if presented with half-size beans, they will they will prefer them in the wild as well. This could possibly be due to burrowing being an easier process. Another thing that we wanted to cover is that this entire experiment wasn't completely finished, as we had to have some complications due to the virus. So that could also be some sort of an issue with our data, as we didn't fully get to complete our experiment in the entire time that we had previously thought we would have, which could also affect some of the egg laying rates and living beetle rates. But overall, once again, we have learned that beetles prefer half-size dishes full of beans as opposed to dishes full of full-size and quarter beans.